scales and weight loss, and using it as a measure and tracking for how we're doing with our fitness journey. Now, a lot of people's goals will revolve around weight loss, fat loss, changing the body composition is probably a better way actually to present it, in terms of expectations, particularly if you add training to the mix and different nutrition. Then the old kind of thinking, if I don't eat too much and my weight is going to come down, I'll see that on the scales, that is being successful. And for most people, I certainly grew up with it, the scales in the bathroom, kind of tucked away at the side of the toilet or down under the side of the sink, and then periodically they'd come out, mum, dad weigh themselves. As a kid you see them doing it, so you copy, and the numbers didn't mean very much, because the ones that I had growing up were just in stones and pounds, and it just is what it is. And in a lot of ways, actually, the scales, that's all it is. It's our relationship of our mass to gravity, and every object exerts a force, and the scales are measuring that force of us in comparison to the earth. It has become, over the years, a big deal, as in the go-to measurement. And it's very much linked to success or failure towards what I've been doing in terms of my nutrition, my training, my activity, my exercise. If it doesn't show up on the scales, the work that I've done, the sacrifices that I've made, the things I haven't eaten, the activity I didn't really want to do, but I did it, but it doesn't reflect on the scales at that point that you then use them, then that can be a bit disappointing and hit our self-esteem. And a few times like that, sometimes only one, people will go, do you know what, it's not worth it, it's not happening again, I'm not going to carry on doing it. But there's so much that can influence the actual number on the scales, that you could be doing everything right, and in the background you are utilising body fat as fuel, as energy, because you're in a calorie deficit and your body composition is changing. It's just not showing up in that measure of the scales ticking down that 1-2 pounds, half a kilo to a kilo, that we might want or aspire to every week, or faster. But we've got to be realistic as well, and we want to see there is the potential for it to be going down when everything's going right. But there's so many quite simple factors that are going on that means we might not see that scale changing, certainly not in a linear fashion, as in week after week, 1-2 pounds coming down. And for some people that does happen, just physiologically and circumstantially, environmentally, they can tick all the boxes all of the time, they do everything right, and it ticks on down. Now, it's more likely to happen for guys, and that's one of the things that can affect scale weight, more particularly for ladies, is the menstrual cycle. And around the cycle, and particularly around the time of menstruation, ladies naturally retain more fluid, retain more water for the physiological processes that are going on, and weight can actually seem to go up, and that is very, very common. So that's something I'm going to talk about in more detail next week, into the different elements of the cycle, with different hormones, what's going on. And even for guys, it's good to have that understanding, because you're probably around ladies that are affected by it, and having a bit of a understanding and can be a bit more empathetic about what's going on is always a good thing. So that's one of the reasons. Step on the scales. Potentially you're doing it at a similar sort of time every week. Now, you can't really say that everything in the previous 2, 3, 4, 5 days has been exactly the same week after week. We don't eat exactly the same things, we don't do exactly the same things, we don't sleep exactly for the same amount of time, and all those things add up. So getting on the scales and it hasn't changed, or it's gone in the wrong direction, it might just be that you are still processing the food that you ate the day before. It's not like we eat, process all the food, it's all gone out of our system. We are it's still there. It's still in the digestive system. It's still being processed. It's still being absorbed, and that's going to affect the weight of our bodies. But that is not our actual body weight. That is the food being processed in there. Similarly, hydration. If we've had lots of fluid and lots of water, that is going to still be in our system. We've still got to process it. We've still got to go through all the processes, be used or not used in the body, and then we'll go to the toilet and the excess will be gone out, and that is going to affect their scale weight as well. And some people are quite consistent. You wake up in the morning, you need to go to the toilet, and if that happens and you weigh yourself, and that means potentially the when you're doing it is more similar to the previous week, then it's closer to a more accurate reading. But even then, volumes, things like that, going to be different. Bodies are amazingly complex, and they never do everything the same all the time. So that is going to contribute. So we've got menstrual cycle, food and water in the system. Then it's going to depend on the type of food, and particularly the seasoning, and particularly sodium. Salt is used in a lot of food. It's not actually as bad as historically it's kind of been made out in terms of excess salt. Kind of consumption became a concern with health issues and things like that, but also at the same time as the salt was in processed food. But actually, the fullness of time with more research, the fact of processed food and that abundance and people's overall body weight going up is more of the reason for health issues than just the salt being present itself. Our body's really good at processing salt, but salt does need to be balanced out in the body. If the environment in the body needs to be kept at what's called the homeostasis, as in completely balanced, and the way that the body balances excess salt is with water to buffer it, to dilute it to the right dilution. So maybe a particularly seasoned salty meal or two in the day before the day that you weigh on the scales, and you might well have once again retained more water to deal with that extra sodium that was there. In the next couple of days, the body will flush it, process it out, and it will be back to kind of normal. So after that, just the general changes in our body in terms of body temperature. If you have a particular night, and most people, I would recommend to weigh in the morning, so most people kind of do that before they've eaten. If you had a particularly warm night or a particularly cold night, our body's then doing different physiological processes to balance up optimal temperature. The optimal temperature inside our bodies is around about 21 degrees. So that is going to then have an impact on how much our body weighs because of the processes going on around that. And there's two parts to this, if you are training weights, resistance training, or body weight bands, etc., anything that is causing a weight like resistance training stimulus on the body, there's two factors that can be going on. When we train and we get that soreness afterwards, that's actually caused by micro tears in the muscles. So to repair those micro tears, the body has to go through processes again, and one of those processes is using fluid to sit in the gaps, to sit in those tears as they repair, to bring the nutrients, to bring the amino acids to repair the muscles. So a bit more retention there. The other factor is if you are new to training, even in a calorie deficit, potentially you're going to be building some muscle during that repair. The muscle's going to be building back that little bit stronger, that little bit heavier, therefore, because there's more muscle cells there. That is going to have a net increase in terms of body weight over time. Particularly this is if you're new to training. Then from there, once again, on what we're eating, carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are great. We need them for fuel. But in the body, they get broken down to glucose and then reconstituted, rebuilt into a substance called glycogen, which the body can store in the liver, and it can store it in muscles and other cells as well. But for every gram of glycogen that the body is storing, it needs 2.7 grams of water associated with it, like a little unit. It's actually one kind of molecule of glycogen and 4 molecules of water to go together. So that means through carbohydrate consumption, we're naturally going to hold that bit more water. Now, the flip side of this is if someone cuts down or cuts out carbs completely, so they start following a keto style diet, then they are going to use up all the stored glycogen and glucose, and there's no longer need for that water, so they're going to process that out. Which is why you might hear of someone, a friend or whatever, oh, I've done this amazing diet where I've cut out all my bread, rice, pasta, everything, anything carbohydrate, not touched it for a week, and I lost 6 pounds. A lot of that big weight loss is actually just going to be utilising the glucose and glycogen that's no longer present in the body, and the associated water has also been processed out as well. In real terms, if they're in a calorie deficit, they probably only lost 1 or 2 pounds, the same as someone following a more balanced approach and having a good amount of carbohydrates, fats and proteins, balancing those out. So you hear about sometimes these big weight losses, and it is possible, if you hit a big deficit, things like that, it's just not sustainable, as is potentially a diet in a more keto style where you only eat protein, you only eat fats. That kind of cuts down the potential food on social situations. It cuts down the potential food when you go around to a friend's house, go to a restaurant, all those sorts of things. So long term, not necessarily a good approach. The keto diet is recommended for people with epilepsy. That's where it came from. It is a tool in a doctor's strategy to help with that, and it has gained popularity as a diet strategy for weight loss, and that could be a personal choice, but not one I would necessarily recommend when looking more at a balanced, sustainable approach to health and fitness. So then on to alcohol. Now, I will do talk about balance, and having alcoholic drinks, 1, 2, whatever, social occasions, the weekend, whatever it is, isn't inherently bad. The calories are in there. If we're tracking, we take account for those. But the knock-on effect is, actually in the first instance, might actually cause some dehydration as the body deals with the alcohol in the system, has to process it out first, because as it breaks down, it does actually break down into a substance that overall is poisonous in the body. It doesn't actually poison us because the body processes it out. So because it's done that, it's also used a lot of water to do that. So that's where dehydration comes from. If you drink a lot and you have a hangover and you feel really thirsty, that's why. So that initial part might actually cause a real drop in scales. But then in the following couple of days, the body's trying to get that water, replace it. It's going to retain more water as it comes into the system until it feels back to where it should be, that homeostasis I was talking about before. So depending on, say you had your drinks on a Friday night, you're weighing on a Monday morning, you're back into the time when the body's trying to fill itself back up, so more water is going to be retained and present, so that's going to affect the scales as well. And the last thing is, can we ever be sure, if we're depending on where we keep the scales, that we have placed them down in exactly, are we wearing the same clothes as we were the previous time? There's so much that can be slightly different in that, and that is going to give up and down reading, which is why I'm not saying using the scales is a terrible idea. It's just keeping its importance in the right place and using it as a tool. Okay, if you know that you haven't 100% done everything that you should and the scales haven't moved, you can probably go, do you know what, I understand why this isn't going the right way. I know what I need to do to make it go in the right direction. If you have been doing everything right and it feels really frustrating, then there's these reasons as well why the scales aren't going in the right direction on that single snapshot time of when you take it. Now, a couple of strategies to work around that would be potentially to weigh yourself maybe 3 times in a week. Now, for some people, that's not a good idea because it becomes just about that, and quite obsessive about seeing the number. But if you're someone that can actually just go, this is it, I'll record it, this is the next time, and record it, say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and take an average. Another strategy, which I definitely wouldn't recommend if you're someone that is, can get really fixated on what the scales are saying, is actually to weigh yourself every day. And same time in the morning or whatever, weigh yourself every day, and then look for the trend in that. And even if you did it just as an experiment over a couple of weeks, you would see that it does actually fluctuate. But hopefully, if you're doing all the things you should be doing for weight loss, if that's your goal, utilising body fat as your energy in a calorie deficit, keeping active, keeping that TDDE up, then the trend should be that over time you're getting that scale weight coming down. But as I say, it is just one measure that we can use. Now, it's quite quick and quite easy and quite simple for most people because the scales are there, or the scales are at the gym, they're in the same place all the time. On that calibration thing, scales in the gym, you don't know who's been on, who's knocked it, how many times it's been bashed with the Hoover when the staff have been cleaning the gym, so it's just keeping these things in mind and not being, beholden to what that number says in terms of how it makes you feel and how it affects what you then go and do next in terms of sticking to the process and all those sorts of things. Some other measurements you can utilise and bring all the data together, bring all those results together. So being mindful on this particular day that you actually wore a certain outfit, how did that feel 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line? How's it fitting now? If you are reducing body fat by what you're doing, and the scales aren't moving, but those clothes feel different, your body composition must be changing. As I say, photos as well. How do you look? Sometimes you can't see looking every day, but if you've got a snapshot from a time ago to compare to now, put those two side by side, can you see what changes are going on? Using a tape measure, hips, waist, arms, legs, neck, chest. I encourage all my clients to do that at monthly intervals. Pretty much is probably a good time to do it. Maybe you can measure waist and hips more often, every week, every 2 weeks. See how that's changing. What you can't see, or in terms of mirror or photos, always not being reflected on the scales, maybe those changes are going on, particularly if you've added resistance, weight training, exercise into what you're doing. The body might actually just be plateaued in terms of the weight, but the composition is changing as you are utilising body fat as fuel, but keeping and building a little bit of muscle at the same time with the training that you're doing. Then there is just one's coming down and one's coming up, and actually overall the balance is that your net weight stays the same. And then how are you doing in those workouts? How are you doing in your activities? If you do weight training, are you increasing the weight? Are you increasing the number of repetitions you're doing with the weight you were using before? If you are more cardio based, are you able to go further or do the same routine, time on a treadmill, time on a bike? Are you able to go further or do it quicker if you've set a distance? Do you recover quicker? As in, has your heart and lung capacity and ability to recover, pump blood around your body, has that improved? These are all really, really good measures of is what you are doing actually having a positive benefit. So, keeping it fairly short this evening. Scales are a tool. They're a great tool, but don't be beholden to what they are saying. There's all these reasons why they might not have moved in the right direction, and it's just one part of the kind of results, the data you can look at to assess how you are progressing. And it's just a case of trusting the process, keeping on with it. Don't let a little dial on something that we stand on stop you from keeping on with what you know is is the right thing to do, you've got the principles in the right place, then you keep following them for long enough, being patient, being consistent, you will get the results that you want to get to. Thank you for listening to the Always Moving Forward podcast. You can find more information about MW Fitness at www.mwfitness.net, and all our links to social media are there too.